Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz.
Hi.
All right, it's so great to see you again, and I know that you're in a rush, so let's begin. The Western Wall in Jerusalem has become the source of great controversy following the Israeli government's decision to suspend an agreement to build an egalitarian prayer space at the holy site. Joining us now in the studio to discuss the aftermath of this controversial move is the CEO of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, and Rabbi Dov Halbertal, the former head of the Office of the Chief Rabbi of Israel. Now, Professor Dershowitz, both of our guests are lawyers, so I think we can look forward to an interesting discussion. So let's begin with our first question. On last week's show, Professor Dershowitz, you said that former U.S. President Barack Obama betrayed Israel and the Jewish people over the Western Wall, but now it looks like the Jewish people are divided amongst themselves over that same holy site. This is the third time that the deal to build an egalitarian prayer section has been shelved, and many are understandably upset. The Jewish Agency even decided to cancel a dinner with the Israeli Prime Minister on the heels of this decision, as well as a decision regarding Jewish conversion. So let me start with you, Professor Dershowitz. What do you think about the Western Wall decision? Can the Israeli people and even the Jewish diaspora continue to trust the government?
Well, the issue of the Western Wall is a Jewish issue and an Israeli issue. Obviously, who controls the Western Wall, whether it's occupied territory, as the absurd Security Council resolution suggested, those are Israeli issues. But the Western Wall, as Judaism's most sacred place, is a Jewish issue. And the Jewish community as a whole should be heard on the issue. The Jewish community around the world is divided, obviously, among many groups. Haredi Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, secular, agnostic, atheists, even atheists and agnostics find the wall a very important place. They don't pray at it, obviously, because they don't pray. But reform, conservative, reconstructionist Jews exercise their religious needs at the Kotel. And so I think a compromise is absolutely necessary. Look, the expression goes that if the Arabs would just leave Israel alone for a few years, they would succeed because Israel would destroy itself internally. I've never believed that. I'd love to see Israel left alone for a few years and be able to resolve its own issues. But, you know, without myself coming down at any firm conclusion, because I don't know the details and the specifics, I do think that compromise is essential, that the chief rabbinate of Israel ought to recognize the authenticity of conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism, Reconstruction Judaism, and other forms of Judaism, and not seek to have a monopoly on who was a Jew and who gets to convert and who was an authentic rabbi. These are issues that require compromise in the interest of unity of the Jewish people.
Now, Rabbi Halbertal, how do you respond?
With all the honor, I'm against. I think I want to set up one important point. We are in Israel giving our lives, the soldiers. I would have bring not only Dershowitz, but all the, all the reforms from there to the military cemetery to see 27,000 soldiers buried there. They gave their lives for Yerushalayim and for the Wailing Wall. While them themselves were sitting in Miami Beach, making a barbecue, or maybe in a very important restaurant there in Washington. So the question is, who is willing, or who is the one who is obliged and have the right to decide, if he can decide upon the values here in Israel? And if you ask a question, if we are obliged, I mean the citizens of Israel, to decide upon our values, and if we can do it, the answer is yes, we can.
Now,
that's a totally phony argument. Let me tell you why it's a phony argument. You look me in the eye, Rabbi. And you tell me that you would make that same argument if there were a referendum in Israel and the referendum said that from now on the Kotel will become a place that men and women can pray together. There will be no part of the Kotel that will be Orthodox. You would be making exactly the opposite argument. That is a totally phony argument. It's an insulting argument to talk about the dead soldiers. We have no idea whether the soldiers who died for Israel were secular people, were Reform people, were Orthodox people. That is a totally phony argument. I want to ask you a direct question, Rabbi. If a referendum in Israel were to favor opening up the entire wall, no more Orthodox, just everybody has to pray together, men and women together, would you say the soldiers died for Israel, the Israeli people have to make that decision? Or would you now come up with a different argument?
I wouldn't say it, but nobody will. We are an Orthodox state. Now, it's not 15% of the ultra-Orthodox that are ruling here, you know, taking the neck of the state. All the Sephardic here, 50%, are traditionally and are Orthodox, the wing of Orthodox. We are 80%, nobody will decide the way you said here in Israel. No. It's only the Reforms and the Conservatives living there in the States have they have no right to decide on other values. We respect them. We know they do a lot for us. But they have to respect us more than we respect them.
Now, like,
it's an embarrassment that they didn't meet Bibi Netanyahu. It's an embarrassment. I would have said that Jacobs has to be persona non grata.
All right, I'd like to bring Rabbi Karev into the discussion.
As the head of one of phony argument. It's a phony argument completely. You use democracy when it supports your religious views, and you totally reject democracy when it doesn't support your religious views. Nobody should listen to this claim of democracy because it's hypocritical. No. It only comes from him because he believes that a majority today, I don't know if he's right or wrong, a majority today supports his view, but you have no faith in democracy at all. You wouldn't accept that argument if a democratic process ruled against you. So I categorically reject your argument.
Now, Rabbi Karev, as the head of one of the two major non-Orthodox streams in Israel, how do you think that this move will affect Israeli society? And is that claim fair that the majority of the people in this country are Orthodox and would support the Orthodox move to not build an egalitarian prayer section?
Now, in a second, I will refer to your important question, but it's very difficult for me as an officer of the IDF. I served the IDF in the IDF for 5 years. I lost few friends in the Lebanon war, and every Yom HaZikaron I'm in the military cemeteries. While Dov said his troubling comments, I thought about Rabbi Chaim Moshe Weiler, one of the founders of our movement in Israel, who lost 2 sons in the Yom Kippur war. And to think that I'm sitting next to a person that doesn't send his children to the Israeli army and has the chutzpah to mention or to make this comment, it's unbelievable. Rabbi Albertal served in the army, but his children didn't serve in the IDF. I served for 5 years, and he talks about the military cemeteries. If there is one community in Israel that is not represented on Israel Memorial Day in the military cemeteries, it's the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community. Shame on you.
But we are taking a more important burden here in the States.
Shame on you, Rabbi Albertal.
We are taking a more important value.
That you had the courtesy.
You are not here. You are not here. You are 0.5%. You are 0.5% of the population here. 0.5%, and you talk like you have been.
Rabbi Albertal, I listened very carefully to your insulting comments.
You are embarrassing.
Now,
I believe in free speech, but I think it was a mistake to have Rabbi Albertal on the show. He is a total and complete phony who makes outrageous phony arguments that nobody should listen to in Israel. The idea that he invokes Israeli soldiers is disgraceful. The idea that he talks about people like me having barbecues in Miami is disgraceful. The idea that he invokes democracy when he hates democracy and when he would totally ignore democracy if it came out against them. I don't know why you give a platform to this.
Why aren't you coming here to Israel? 3 million
why the rabbi from Boston is not? Why the
there
rabbi?
in the States? They don't come here.
Rabbis,
why they aren't coming? And why they were against the establishment of this state, the reform? Why? Tell me why. And they want to tell us what to do here.
Professor Dershowitz, I need to tell you that I'm glad that Rabbi Albertal was invited, because I think it's the time for North American Jews, even for modern Orthodox North American Jews, to understand what we are dealing with here in Israel when we are talking about the Orthodox establishment. And it's time to understand that the mechitza, the division in the Jewish people, is not really between Orthodoxy and Reform Judaism. It's between those that believe in pluralism, including many Orthodox Jews.
Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about Jewish identity in Israel.
And those that are trying to promote incitement and hatred here in Israel and around the Jewish people.
You are the one who brings hate here. You are 0.5% here. You don't have the voice here.
Professor Dershowitz, I don't think I'm able to get another question in here for you, but I would like to talk about the Supreme Court, because this is, like we said, the third time that this egalitarian prayer section has been shelved. How do you think the Supreme Court will react if this issue, and once this issue reaches them?
Well, first of all, the Haredi community has attacked the Supreme Court repeatedly when the Supreme Court came out with decisions that were against its unpluralistic views. Now, it would be interesting to see how the Haredi community supports the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court were to come up with decisions that support its view. I don't know enough about the specific personnel of the Supreme Court or which justices would be picked to sit on panels to know how the court would come out in this case. I can only tell you that David Ben-Gurion made a terrible, terrible mistake in 1948 when he made the compromise with the Orthodox rabbinate that turned over to the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate decisions about Judaism in Israel, decisions about marriage. The effect has been horrible. The effect has been that many young Jews don't marry in Israel because they don't want rabbis like Rabbi Halbertal to be telling them how to live their lives. People, in America, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist Jews all get along with each other. Why? Because no group tells the other group what to do. We have great pluralism in America. In Israel, because there isn't sufficient separation between church, state, mosque, and synagogue, the conflicts are extremely great and have to be resolved by the court. So I would hope that this is one area where Israel could learn from the United States and create a strict separation. Abolish the chief rabbinate. There's no room in Israel for any governmental relationship between religion and the government. Let the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi, the Orthodox, let them try to get people to support their views. And if people want to, they can. But compulsion has no place in religion. And compulsion has no place in defining who is a Jew, who is a rabbi, who is an appropriate person to marry. Let's also remember something very important about Judaism. Judaism is a religion where rabbis are absolutely irrelevant and unnecessary. There isn't a single mitzvah in Judaism that requires a rabbi. You don't require a rabbi to get married. You don't require a rabbi to have a brit milah. You don't require a rabbi to lead a congregation. You don't require a rabbi for anything. Theodor Herzl said the rabbis should stay in their temples, should stay in their shuls. They should not be part of governance. There should not be Orthodox Jewish parties in Israel. There should not be any relationship between the rabbinate and the government. Everybody would be better off. Religion would thrive. Religion thrives in America. Many, many more Jews identify religiously in America than identify religiously in Israel. And the reason for that is because we have separation between religion and state. And so, Israel would benefit enormously.
If you know who are those that don't want to be separated here, you know who? The secular citizens here in Israel. It's not only the Haredim.
You are representing the secular citizens.
I know.
You know.
80%.
Let's go as the professor suggested. Let's do a
separate
referendum.
in between the state and religion with the government of Lapid in 5 minutes. They didn't dare to do it because they know they don't want to separate here in Israel in between the religion and state. Nobody wants. You are the only one. Nobody wants. Professor Dershowitz is sitting there. He doesn't know that here in Israel the citizens don't want to separate.
Let's talk a little bit about the Jewish diaspora and those Jews who are not living here in Israel. You know, I have to mention that just about an hour before today's show, I got a call from one of our regular viewers who's made 2 trips to Israel in the last year, and he's given over $200,000 to a variety of deserving charities that help all sorts of people here, as well as NGOs that fight BDS and promote Israel's image in the world. Now, I felt the pain in his voice. He asked me, why should he come to Israel again or make more donations when the government gives into minority pressures and spits in his face? So the question here is, how will Israel's relationship with the Jewish diaspora be affected by this? Professor, would you like to begin with responding to that?
Well, let's not overstate it. American Jews, American Christians love Israel, support Israel, even when it makes mistakes. And this is a serious mistake. So I don't think that support for Israel will be substantially diminished. But I do think that it's a serious mistake for religion. I think religion suffers when it needs the compulsion of the state. What does it say about religion? What it says is basically, Orthodox Judaism doesn't have enough to offer on the merits. It's afraid that people will reject it on the merits unless it has the force of the state behind it. If you have confidence in your religious views, you don't need the government behind you. You don't need the financial support of the government. You don't need the military economic support of the government to keep the kotel the way it is. What you need is to persuade people. And I think that when the religion and state are separate, the religion gets stronger. The person who created separation of church and state in America talked about the garden and the wilderness. And he actually wanted separation in order to keep the wilderness of the state out of the garden of religion. And I think what we see in Israel is extreme corruption in religion as the result of money, as the result of state power. Whenever you see a merger between the religion and state, inevitably you see corruption, because corruption follows the money and money follows the state. So I think religion would be far better off. I think people of Israel would be better off. I think diaspora relations would be better off if we had a strict separation between all religion and all state. Let religion stand or fall on their merits and demerits, on their ability to persuade people, and let the state continue to govern in a secular manner.
Now, Rabbi Halbertal, what do you say to young Jews who are living, let's say, in the United States, Argentina? They feel connection to Israel, but they now feel that almost their Jewish identity is being threatened because they don't necessarily identify with the ultra-Orthodox community. What is your response to their feelings about this?
What it means that they don't accept? He comes 2 times a year here. We are taking here the citizens, the burden here. People are being killed in Damascus Gate. People are killed in the territories.
Go and serve in the army.
We are taking
Go and serve in the army. Send your kids to serve in the army to protect the life of Israelis. You sit here and talk about the burden.
It's not only
90% of your young people are not integrated in the Israeli economy. You are talking about the burden.
Let me finish. We, the citizens of Israel, are taking everybody, not only the army. I'm not talking only of the army. The taxes, the daily burden. He's sitting there. I will tell you something, Professor Dershowitz. He's not coming here because he loves America. He doesn't want to come here anyhow. 3 million reform, nobody will come here. Even no Orthodox will be here.
I want to
assure you, they will not leave the stakes in America. They will not leave the prosperity of America. They will not come here. They don't come here because they don't want to come here.
You know, Professor Dershowitz, let's let Professor Dershowitz speak.
Rabbi, I want to repeat my challenge to you, and please answer this question directly. If a majority of Israelis in a referendum, your people, the people who are at Damascus Gate, the people you talk about, if a majority of Israelis were tomorrow to vote to have a mixed section of the kotel, would you suddenly support that because it was decided by a majority of Israelis?
No,
or would you come with another phony argument against it Answer that question directly, please.
Directly, I say, not at all. I will not accept it, but what means not accept it? I will not be violent. I will not accept it. I will be very against it, and I am against it. But on the other hand, I will respect the fact that I'm living in a state that there are rules that I have to obey.
Let's do a referendum.
I will not accept it.
Well, let's turn to another issue.
But to the separation, I want to say one thing.
Wait, well, the thing is we have 5 minutes left. We have 5 minutes left, Rabbi, so I'm going to move on to our next topic. I'm really sorry to shut you down here, but look, you know, we know that this has already created a storm within Israel that divides people here and also drives a wedge between the Jewish state and the Jewish people, but it also comes just as a second bill was passed giving the Israeli chief rabbinate full authority over Jewish conversions in Israel. This will essentially delegitimize the legal identity of thousands and thousands of people who have converted worldwide, but not through the Israeli rabbinut. This means that these people who have been so-called Jewish enough to move to Israel and join the military are somehow not Jewish enough to have a Jewish wedding or be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Now, Professor Dershowitz, how does this move affect the Jewish people, and who stands to gain from this bill and who stands to lose?
Well, first of all, the Jewish community around the world ought to simply and categorically reject it and say, look, we don't accept you. We don't accept what you say. We regard ourselves as Jews. We're going to act as Jews. We're going to treat each other as Jews. We're going to regard you as the outliers. We're simply not going to accept a political decision about who is a Jew and who is not a Jew and who is an appropriate rabbi and who is not an appropriate rabbi. And we're going to see the courts filled with cases involving whether or not a brave soldier, and the rabbi talks about soldiers, a brave soldier who leads his troops in combat and yells Acharai and gets killed has to be buried in a non-Jewish cemetery because some rabbi, political rabbi, has made the decision that he wasn't Jewish enough to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. It's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable morally. It's not acceptable religiously. And I think that Jews who don't accept this, and there are many Orthodox Jews who don't accept this, ought to simply reject it on the merits and not follow it and engage in acts of civil disobedience, declare themselves to be Jews, demand that they be married Jewishly, that they tragically, when they die, be buried Jewishly, and simply do not accept this. It's an unacceptable decision to turn over to one small group that represents a tiny fraction of Israel. And I have another proposal. I think that that Israelis who refuse to serve in the army for religious reasons ought to also be denied their right to vote. I think that if you refuse to defend your country on religious grounds because you don't believe somehow it's a country that deserves to be defended, I'm not sure why you get the right to vote and the right to form political parties and the right to participate in Israeli democracy. Just like the rabbi says, I have no right to participate in Israeli democracy. I don't, because my children don't fight in wars. I didn't fight in a war. And maybe the implications of that ought to be if you refuse to fight in a war on religious grounds, you ought to also refuse to vote on religious grounds. I don't see how you get to vote and not fight for Israel's security.
Rabbis, any response?
Yes, if I may, because, look, I think that besides saying amen after all the things that Professor Dershowitz just mentioned, I need to say that the real threat right now is the conversion bill. And here we see a direct attempt of the Orthodox establishment, ultra-Orthodox establishment in Israel that represent a small minority, not only in the entire Jewish people, but also here in Israel, less than 10% of the Jewish population. Here we see a direct attempt of the ultra-Orthodox establishment to hold the keys to the doors of the Jewish people. And we do not have the moral right to give them those keys. We have a very important task to open the doors of the Jewish people and to make sure that we secure the Jewish future of all families in Israel and overseas that have some connection as a family to our Jewish faith and our Jewish tradition.
Thank you so much for your time, Professor Dershowitz. I also want to thank Rabbi Gilad Kariv and Rabbi Halbertal for joining us. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.